Hey everybody, it's EK from EK Gorman Designs, and I am sneaking in today with the second part of the Kindred Stamps Justice to Serve 10 cards, 1 kit collection. I'm starting off with card 6 because if you've missed the first part, I'll link to it above, but I've already shown the first 5 cards I've made. For the 6th card here, I'm playing with this underwater superhero, and I wanted him to have a really great, like, sea weather tan skin tone. Not a combination of colors I've actually ever wanted to play with before in terms of skin tones, that like overly tanned, almost leathery, but not icky looking skin tone. So I was experimenting with some colors, and these were the 3 I came up with to kind of achieve that more Mediterranean weathered look. Not that Mediterranean is a weathered. I'm just making a fool of myself. So yes, these 3 markers I came up with for a kind of weathered look. The uniform, if you know your comics, this is traditionally like the worst uniform ever in old school comic books. Did not want to do that. So I just made it a really cool gray. Like, tried to show some dimensions and spice to it, but definitely a cool looking gray. And then for his blue belt and his yellow scepter is not the word, trident, I just went with one color, just to, like, there was no need for super fancy coloring. I often say I am the world's worst hair colorer, and this hair coloring right here shows exactly why I say that. It is not well done. I should have stamped him over and started over again, but I didn't. I was like, no, it's not that bad. It's not that, and all truth, once the whole card is assembled, it's not that bad. It just isn't that good. I pulled three of the different papers out. There isn't actually a great blue paper in this collection, not one that's like a true blue, but there are 3 separate green papers. And I was like, well, the sea could be green. So I die cut them so they had kind of an oceany feel to them, and layered them upon one another, and then got my sea superhero tucked in. Just because yeah, I like the idea of him coming out of the ocean and not, in fact, like standing on the boat or something. And then I wanted to do a sentiment that kind of mimicked the ocean. And instead of pulling out the die and die cutting it again, I just hand cut it. Like, I just cut a swirl and a swoop and added it to the card because, yeah, I too can be lazy. But I like how the card turned out. I think it has a very fun ocean feel to it without a whole lot of flash and bang. For card 7, I pulled out a scrap of paper and just stamped out this robotic hero. And I wanted to stay true to some of current pictures of him and go with much darker skin tone. And this is my tried and true. Actually, it's not my favorite darker skin tone. It's my second favorite. But I didn't want to go super, super dark because I didn't know how dark I was going to go with his uniform. In hindsight, I could have probably gone even darker with his skin tone. But I love how this combination works out. I think it's rich and it's deep and it's full and it gives great dimension. So with his uniform, I wanted it to not be shiny and new feeling. I wanted it to be almost slightly distressed. So I went with the warm grays because I think the warm grays can give a really great distressed tin feel. I also knew I wanted lots of pops of red, so I left certain areas ready to take in red coloring. Many of these, I will tell you, many of these stamps are actually kind of hard to color with great dimension because they're so detailed. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a really good detailed stamp. I think the companies that make really, really detailed stamps give all the credit in the world, especially if I pull out my colored pencils and color an image like this with colored pencils. Sometimes it's a little bit harder, though, to color a image like this with your markers because you're trying to get a big nib into a tiny little area, and you wonder if you're getting the depth and the dimension, like if all the hard work is paying off. In this case, I think all the hard work really did pay off. Once I finished coloring his body, I realized that that's his hair showing, so I dropped in some just dots to fill in the color, and the video doesn't show it, but in real life, his hair's got some nice depth and dimension. For the red, I didn't do anything fancy. In fact, I just dropped the color in and kept it simple. I fussy cut out the hero and then pulled out some papers. Now, I'm going to tell you a big secret. This final look that the circle printed paper from the kit came up with, that was more of a mistake than it was anything else. I misjudged how to cut my paper. I meant for those two lines, diagonal lines, to match flush up together, and I guess I stopped thinking and didn't cut it right. And I was like, no, I can make this work. It's not going to be awful. And in the end, I actually kind of liked the white space the card allowed me, because I misjudged how to do it. It changed the final layout of the card, but I actually really like how it worked out. It kept it simple without all the extra fuss and muss that originally was going to put into this card. I did decide I needed a couple of sequins, and I dumped them out and discovered there were blue sequins, which was really exciting because I kept thinking the whole collection was golds and yellows and blacks, but there's a couple big blue ones, and that was fun. It actually was like the perfect combination of color to add to this specific card. Not that there's any blue in his uniform, because sure, but there's so much blue with the red circles. If you have a quick pick, like, I'm often like, you don't need tools. Like, you just don't need a lot of the tools. But that quick pick is hands down one of the best tools I ever invested in. It made sequin application so much easier. For card 8, I started by stamping onto some white cardstock from my personal stash. I wanted to create my own paper, and I just used the lightning bolts and bats to just randomly stamp. And yes, I intentionally left that bottom corner empty, knowing I was going to fill it. This purple printed paper is hands down my favorite printed paper from the kit. I am an old school comic girl, like truly grew up reading comic books, and this is the epitome of the kind of comics I grew up on. Now, I was doing some debate, wanted this 3-dimensional, and in the end I decided to go flush because I knew it'd be easier to cut it off in the end. So I laid the cardstock down on an angle and then just trimmed off the excess. I knew there needed to be a cool sentiment, so I decided to do some embossing. And I stamped out the sentiment in my VersaFine ink, and then just used some white embossing powder that I have and heat set it. I like the sentiment, the I'm batty about you. I thought it was, even though there's nothing about the card that says bat, I thought it worked. Like, it definitely has that old school Batman Adam West feel about it, the paper does. So I thought it was a very appropriate, fitting look to it. I did end up adding the sentiment with my 3-dimensional tape. And then pulling out the sequins that come in the kit, I just pulled out 2 of the bats. Now you get to watch me fumble for the bats. Sometimes it is really just easier dumping the sequins out and putting them back in than trying to grab just 2 specific sequins. But I pulled 2 of the bats out and just added them to the card and kept it this simple. And this ended up, despite how simple it was my favorite card of all 10 I made. Card 9, some of my video footage got eaten. Like, seriously, technology's not fun. The whole making of the card got eaten. But what I did for the card was I took back out the washi tape that comes in the card, and I created my own pattern paper using the washi tape, offsetting it so that there was rows created. And then I used some of the paper and laid it down on the card, and using some of my personal die cut out of sentiment. Originally, when I created this card, I intended not to have a character on it, but in hindsight, looking at how much empty space I created in the middle of the card, a character was needed. And I figured when I initially colored this dark hero, I did it on black cardstock with colored pencil, so it was totally acceptable to like recreate him again, this time on white cardstock using my Copic markers and playing with the depth and dimension with alcohol markers. And this may be one of my better coloring jobs of all the different heroes I created, just because I think I got my shadows and dimensions and depths laid out correctly. like I said, there's the stamps for this collection are so detailed. Sometimes, because they are so detailed, you can destroy your own coloring by overthinking and overanalyzing. And with this one, I just kind of kept it simple. Um, the key was for me creating that nose so it looked like it came out a little bit further than the rest of his face. And I think I created that. I fussy cut out the dark hero and I laid him down in the middle of this card. My final card for this collection, I pulled back out the embossing folder and this time embossed the card on stock, embossed it onto some dark cardstock, and then using a white pigment ink, gently ran the pad over the embossed areas so that it picked up the white ink. And I kind of like the very sketchy, very almost chalkboardy feel about how the embossed piece came out. This paper, which I'd used already once in the set, is my second favorite paper. Again, because it has that old school comic book feel about it that is so awesome. I thought it might be fun if that paper became the skyline and became the sky, instead of like using the clouds or using a white piece of paper, letting that become the fun. Uh, Here I badly stamp out like I often do, and put some Distress Oxides around the edge. Now here's where I'm a goober and realized that I didn't let the ink dry and I smudged it, so then I used my finger and just went ahead and smudged everything. And there's the final card for my tin collection. Thanks for tuning in. If you missed the first part in the series, go back and check it out. Otherwise, happy crafting, everybody. Bye.